radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. Thank you for joining us. Today is September 12th, 2017. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here on the West Coast. We really appreciate you joining us. And I want to talk about a few things today. But first, I want to thank our affiliate in Eugene, Oregon, KEPW.org, for carrying our show and also for carrying Libby Halevi's show, Nuclear Hot Seat. It's really important that this kind of information gets out, and we really appreciate that. Today we have back with us a returning friend of our show, Wendy Lumetta. She lives in St. Louis. She's a St. Louis activist, and for those of you who are new to our show or are not completely aware, St. Louis has an ongoing horrible situation there. They are the victims of the Manhattan Project, frankly, where there was nuclear waste that was buried, hundreds of tons, 200,000 pounds of it, I think. They moved it out, and then they discovered that there was some waste had been illegally sold and buried at a landfill, and now it's on fire. And so there's two separate groups of people basically in St. Louis who've been dramatically affected. And Wendy Lumetta is an activist there. She doesn't live in either one of the neighborhoods, but she's been involved in her community. She grew up there. She was affected by much of this. And anyways, she's here to share with us some thoughts about what's going on in St. Louis. And as usual, we tend to veer off on other opinions, so you'll just have to grin and bear it. But we really appreciate your time, Wendy. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Lonnie. I always appreciate the time that you spend on this important issue, and I'm just really grateful for the format. So thank you.
Well, the interesting thing is, I have reached out to many people in St. Louis, and they are either in litigation or choose not to speak to me because of the, it's kind of gotten divisive in St. Louis. You and I talked about how we should bring this up, but I think it's kind of important in understanding what happens in communities that are affected by a government project that's been neglected and gone sour and harms everybody. And I think it's kind of the dynamics of it. What do you think?
You're very observant, and just to kind of expand on what you said, actually, I don't live in St. Louis proper. I live on the other side of the Missouri River, which is in St. Charles. It's a different county, and it's the neighboring county to St. Louis. And we actually also have our own nuclear history here. They had produced war materials. I know that TNT and DNT were two of the war materials that were produced in St. Charles. And I know that St. Charles has a it's basically an entombed area. I think it's 1.5 million cubic yards of basically contaminated waste. And this happened, I'm going to say maybe 20 years ago or so. I'd have to look up the specifics.
Wow.
But the government or whoever it was that was checking on these things found out that this waste was dangerously close to a water facility where people were getting their drinking water. So rather than take it away from the area, which is what the FUSRAP, Army Corps of Engineers, has been doing for about that long in the St. Louis area, the people in St. Charles decided that they would be satisfied with having it entombed on site. So unlike other places where they might consider putting a cap on top, that really doesn't do anything, because then the waste and the particles can go into the ground and go underneath and end up in aquifers and water ways that way. So in St. Charles, they have this, it's, ironically, the highest point in elevation in St. Charles. So it's a big mountain of nuclear waste. And
wow.
that is what we have out here. And it's really not anything to be proud of. It's also,
when you say it's entombed, how is it entombed? What happened? How did they do that?
Apparently they took the area that was extremely polluted, and they built a sort of capsule, kind of. They, lined it on the bottom, and then they filled it up with all this contaminated material, and then they put a cover on the top, and they put rocks on top of that. And the really interesting thing is that we already know that these radioactive isotopes have half-lives into the millions and even billions of years. Yet this engineering structure has, it's considered to be safe for up to 1,000 years. So that math alone makes me wonder how anyone could have been supportive of this project. But it really came down to there are a lot of lobbyists that are lobbying to keep nuclear waste in place, and I do not agree with that method whatsoever. The Army Corps of Engineers FUSRAP program has proven that they can safely remove the radioactively contaminated waste. They put it in sealed rail cars and ship it to, or take the train to a repository where it's at least not in a highly densely populated area. It's away from water. It's away from people. So even though there's not any ideal place for this waste to go, certainly it should not ever be in a place where children play or people live, or it shouldn't be in any contact with humans at all.
That's true.
And luckily there is legislation that allows workers to be compensated for that, and that is through the RECA, which is the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, where it's also called downwinders, and it is legislation that exists largely in the western states, which is where the above-ground nuclear testing took place in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, from Los Alamos in New Mexico, from the Manhattan Project, all the way up to there is the Nevada test site, which is to the northwest of Las Vegas. Extremely contaminated areas. Also Hanford in Washington. All of these states have this RECA downwinders legislation. And that is something that the leaders of the Coldwater Creek Group are promoting. And quite frankly, we're really hoping that we receive that, not so much so that we can get individually compensated with money, but so that the physicians in the area will know that we've been exposed to something that lowers our immune system and makes us more susceptible to things like cancer and thyroid disease and autoimmune disorders. So it's really important that the downwinder legislation becomes a reality in St. Louis. and I'm hoping that we are on the right track for that. I know that the group is working in coordination with the ATSDR, which is the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And they have taken the data that the Coldwater Creek group has compiled, and they are turning it into a epidemiology study. So I want to say that I read somewhere that they are expecting new information out in February of 2018.
Wow,
so hopefully we'll be able to get some good, positive news about health that is desperately needed around the area. Another part that's so frustrating for me personally is that in so many of these polluted areas, there are no signs warning people. There's nothing to say, don't let the kids play in this creek because it's polluted. There's just that way the people that own the area would incur a liability for that. So instead, they consider that their best action is just to not tell anybody and hope for the best. And I can't disagree with that strongly enough.
That is completely stunning. And it actually kind of surprises me that you guys were not under the RECA Act already. Like, I'm stunned that it's taken this long since they found out about it quite many years ago.
Well, I think anytime you try to get new legislation...
I guess I'm kind of surprised. I guess this is where my surprise is, Wendy, is that the RECA Act is just not an automatic when they discover. I mean, maybe that's what we should. I wonder who is pushing it through now. Who's pushing this legislation through now?
Well, when you say pushing it through, I'm not.
I mean, who is backing it in your state? Is Claire McCaskill and Roy Blunt?
See, I don't believe that they have made any public statements about this. I could be wrong.
I've never heard of them saying anything.
But I would bet that just because of the positions that they are in, that they're not going to mention it until it becomes something that has been validated by the federal government through the ATSDR, which is a division of the CDC.
And you guys are you're applying for that already. That's already in the application.
Well, the ATSDR is already conducting their epidemiological study. And in fact, they had already reviewed some of the initial data and determined that there was enough concerning data to go ahead and do the full epidemiological study. So I know that part of the reason for that is because of the large number of appendix cancers, which prior to this, I had never even heard of appendix cancer. I didn't know that it was something that people got. I thought, people just got appendicitis and had their appendix removed, and that was it. And as it turns out, this is an extremely deadly disease that it has the ability to, if the cancer is not caught in time and if it has spread at all, it has the ability to reseed itself in any location. So you essentially can never get rid of it.
Wow.
I've seen that people have just had, surgery after surgery after surgery and then die anyway. It's horribly tragic and something that the government really needs to absolutely get to the bottom of this. I haven't heard Claire McCaskill or Roy Blunt really even discuss these matters at length. And I have discussed it with their offices so many times. I've called them so many times, and they're just not interested in making Missouri look like it's polluted or that it's, a liability. And so they'll talk about business, they'll talk about McDonnell Douglas all day.
Yeah.
But they won't, which is interesting because all that really does is feed the war machine,
Yeah, but besides that, this is what I don't get about their public positions on this. They are encouraging people to come to St. Louis, and they themselves are knowingly exposing them to nuclear. They must not believe the nuclear contamination is harmful, because if they did, they would move everything they could to get it taken out immediately and then promote Missouri as a place, even as a war machine place. I mean, we get it. Boeing, all that stuff. We know that is the backbone of practically every big city now, because the United States is a war machine. This is
absolutely.
We can't cut off the argument inside Congress is we can't cut off the Pentagon budget because they support so many people. They produce so many products that there's just millions of people working for them all the way to, it's a big employer.
Well, I reject that statement because the military-industrial complex, along with everyone else who has advanced technologically, now they're in a position to where they don't even have to send soldiers out to survey a situation. They just send a drone. And so for them to say that we still need to put all of this money into the military-industrial complex, I just categorically reject that. I read recently that the United States has, I think it was 11 aircraft carriers that are operating all over the planet, and the entire world put together has a total of 8. So the United States has more than the whole rest of the world put together, and each one of these aircraft carriers is humongously expensive to operate, billions and billions of dollars. And
that's my point. They're billions of dollars because, look, we support those industries. Those jobs are here. Those are American jobs. A lot of those, that's what they call American jobs. We're bringing American jobs back. You know what that means? That means we're going to build up the military. What did he request in the budget? $35 billion increase in the military budget, but we have to cut schools, we have to cut healthcare, we have to cut out all these programs, but there's plenty of money for the military.
That makes no sense to me. I think that the people that are calling those shots are criminal and deserve to be prosecuted just like other criminals are.
Well, so how do we get these establishment people? I mean, look, Claire McCaskill, Roy Blunt, I mean, how do we, they have enough money. It's almost like you can't remove these people from office anymore. Our votes don't really matter. That's what the 2016 election showed us, is that it really is a little banana republic. They can rig the machines. They let you believe that you get to vote, but really not so much. And as we've seen, because as we were talking before the show, it's now, when we think about it, St. Louis is under a terrible crisis. We speak to Erica Dugan, who comes from a little podunk town in Oklahoma, like a little, a nice neighborhood outside of a major city in Oklahoma, and we have Flint, Michigan. We have the area surrounding Hanford, the entire Northwest. Portland is contaminated. We have cities around America. New York City is getting, what was it? I'm sure it's even greater now, 66,000% higher than what the NRC says is acceptable limits of tritium into their drinking water, into the Hudson Bay.
I'm not surprised at all. I've also heard an update since Hurricane Harvey that they just turned the nuclear the instrumentation. They just turned it off.
That's right. And we are not going to know. We're not going to know. They are desperately, Nancy Faust lives out there and she's getting information and it is eking out. The other part about Houston that nobody wants to talk about is all of the chemicals that got flooded everywhere. That stuff leaves a toxic residue. And it is
absolutely. It's deadly. It absolutely is. This is the part of the problem I think that exists across government, is that for some reason we have allowed business leaders to make scientific decisions, and that can't happen. That's how Flint got poisoned, because they wanted a cheaper way to go with the pipe, and you can't do it cheap. You have to do it right. And so just this whole, climate change denial thing, I don't understand it. And in fact, I can't even engage in conversations with people about this because I get so angry about it. I just think, how could you be so obtuse and so, negligent at something that is harming so many? I don't understand that. Somebody gave me a great analogy the other day that really worked for me. And it was that, say you were approaching a bridge and you knew that there was a problem with the bridge. And 97% of people tell you don't cross that bridge. But 3% of people say, go ahead, it's fine. Now, are you going to listen to the 97% of people that say don't do it? or the 3% of people? Well, right now, regarding climate change, our legislators are believing the 3% instead of the 97%, and it just can't happen.
Well, this is I have, to me, saying climate change is like nails on a chalkboard. I think we are having an environmental collapse. Our climate is changing because, to me, that's like that is the pablum. Like, under the term of climate change, they're telling us that nuclear is the new alternative, that it's not as bad as fossil fuel. Bill McKibben's, all these big guys, Hansen. So climate change, to me, is about environmental collapse. And when you talk about environmental collapse, you cannot disassociate all the chemicals, the fossil fuel, the trash dumping, the nuclear waste, all of these destructive programs that have just only supported a few people to gain absolute wealth with complete disregard, not only for the masses, but for the environment. And now we're having environmental collapse.
You're absolutely right. I wish I knew the answer. I wish I knew a person that might give me a different perspective on how I could approach this in a different way, because I have called my elected representatives. I've met with them. I've gone to so many different meetings. The EPA seems dedicated to allowing business to set their own limits for pollutants. And their, standby is the solution to pollution is dilution. And there's just nothing that's right about that. Currently, they are taking untreated leachate that comes from a radioactively contaminated area, and they're dumping it upriver of drinking water. I guess assuming that the amount of non-contaminated water would somehow disperse it or make it to where you would be less likely to receive that. But that is not the solution.
That's the standard in the United States. That is the standard. That's the standard. That's why they're saying it's no big deal that Fukushima is dumping 100,000 tons of contaminated wastewater, that Indian Point can dump these hundreds of thousands of tons of tritium, because it's going to be diluted. Tritium doesn't hurt you that badly anyways. I mean, the insanity, it's actually not insanity. It's disregard. It's greed over people and life. And it really, I'm with you on what's it going to take. I think it's going to take, unfortunately, I think it's going to take a serious catastrophe for them to get a come to Jesus moment. I don't think that we can call, I think what we have seen for myself personally, what I've seen and learned really since 9/11, since George Bush stole the election, that's when my come to Jesus moment was, when not a single senator would stand up with a black caucus and ask for an investigation. That's when I realized there has been a military coup in this country. And when Eisenhower was talking to us about worrying about what could happen, he was telling us about what already did happen. For Jimmy Carter to be told by George Bush Sr. when he was exiting as CIA head, that Jimmy Carter, the president of the United States, is not entitled to see what's going on inside the CIA. Yet, they have an unlimited, unauditable budget. They have a black hole. They ask for money, they get it. They are unaccountable to anybody. Nobody has seen their budget, and there is no reconciliation. And they can sell drugs to fund their products. They can child traffic. They can prostitute to fund their projects. And they do. And they sell depleted uranium weapons illegally, and they do. To me, when I found out a few years ago that our country modified its Army manual to use depleted uranium weapons against the entire world's decision to not use depleted uranium weapons. You know why? We have so much nuclear waste. This is the only thing they can do with it. This nuclear cannot be undone. This nuclear, to me, it's about the secrecy. I think the secrecy of it all is, and I think that's kind of what's hurt St. Louis too. There's people that feel like It's like when they called it the first secret city, that movie that C.D. Stelzer did. Honestly, that was a perfect name because it was the first secret city. And it is.
It absolutely is. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think that's what's the illness inside of America. I think it's that secrecy. It's when I talk about this, the battery. How battery of children and women is really a big secret and a shame and a guilt for those men that perpetrate it and continue to do it, or those men that have stopped doing it. Because there's perpetrators involved when we talk about battery and child abuse. The perpetrators are not the focus. It's the victims that are usually the focus, not the perpetrators. What causes them to be perpetrators, and how do they modify their behavior and their thinking so that they can be the people they want to be? It's this whole idea about secrecy, and let's don't talk about it.
It boggles the mind, and truly, when I speak with people in St. Louis about it, recently there was a Facebook thread that showed a map of the United States, and it had the area where Los Alamos and parts of Las Vegas or parts of Nevada were, and it said mystery area with a question mark on it. And so I wrote on that thread, actually that looks like the approximate area of the RICA states, and this is where people were exposed to radioactive isotopes, and they have higher rates of cancer. Well, then another commenter came on that thread and said, I didn't know what I was talking about, and I'm a terrorist for saying it. I said, no, I'm not the terrorist for saying it. The people who did it are the terrorists for making these cancer-causing substances and then not being in charge of them.
You got called a terrorist?
Well, I mean, for me to be the person to mention it makes me a terrorist? I don't understand that.
Did you report that statement? Did you report that statement?
Well, no, because then luckily underneath that statement, somebody who lives in Utah that is a downwinder and had lost members of their family commented under that statement and said, actually, this is real, and, and my family proves it. And so I just wrote back and said, I'm so sorry, and I know that it's real, and people that, just deny it or doubt it obviously haven't taken the time to look and see, what the truth is. They don't, either they're not interested or it doesn't affect them personally, so they don't see why they should care.
That's why people don't, like, the reason you know about it is because of the RICA Act, because you're aware of the RICA Act and you're actively watching legislation to be passed in your area. Do you get what I'm saying? This is what they count on. These are the perpetrators. They count on people's silence. Like, as Americans, we really do act like battered wives with nowhere to go. That's why we stay complicit, because like the Congress, they're boxed in. You know what I told Senator Wyden's office? They can't murder you all. They can't arrest you all. If you guys stand up against the Unpatriot Act and refuse, because they will refuse to speak. This is why when you call your elected representatives now, it's because of the Unpatriot Act. They cannot dialogue with you. They will not talk to you. The person at the other end of the phone is now required to say, thank you for your opinion, we'll pass it on. They are not allowed to tell you what your senator, what your congressman's position is on anything anymore. Because and they call that for national security. To me, the Unpatriot Act was the death knell of, look, 9/11 just passed. They created 9/11 so they could pass the Unpatriot Act. I believe, and I will say this clearly, that I believe that traitors from within our country planned this attack. Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, Bush looks like he went along with it. I don't know who behind them planned this, but these were those Saudi Arabians, that passport that they miraculously found was the stupidest story. Whoever is perpetrating these crimes against our culture needs better writers, because they're so obvious or they want to do it so obvious that it forces people to ignore it. It forces them into their complicity. This is all about the nuclear industry perpetrating crimes against our country. It's like the Nazis infiltrated our government and have taken over. We have had a military coup in our country, and nobody wants to admit it. But that is exactly, we're shocked at the Trumpster, like at Trader Trump. Really? And he's put in nothing but military people around him. Even his personal advisor, his White House chief of staff, is a military man. They understand the chain of command. They understand all of the dirty secrets. Before he even got into office, they knew more than he did. And they know he knows nothing. He's a complete dumbass. Excuse my language.
No problem. I absolutely agree with everything that you just said. It seems like the stockpiles of the military-industrial complex won't ever end as long as there is a reason for the United States, kind of the bully of the world, to pick a fight. And kind of stemming on what you said before, I read an article, I think it was just over this past weekend, that said that Putin had said that if the United States is going to arm the Ukrainian government against Russia, then Russia is going to go ahead and fund ISIS. Well, you can see where this is just a continuous circle that will never end. It's just, they've designed it this way. They've made it so that people will always need these war materials. And until we learn a lesson that there are no winners in war, everyone loses, lives, land, commodities, everything. It's, we need to think of more peaceful ways. We need to look to Gandhi and look to Colin Kaepernick, who did nothing more than did a silent protest on one knee regarding the national anthem. And now everybody and their brother is having a cow over the NFL about it. And I really don't understand that, because I found out recently that up until recently, the NFL had never paid taxes. So, like churches,
exactly.
They had never paid taxes.
That's right. And do you know why they changed from being a nonprofit to a profit corporation? Because they were getting flack because they were paying the chief of the head guy of the NFL organization. So, as a nonprofit, his salary was something like $33 million. Mm-hmm. So they were catching a lot of flack for that, because they had to have full disclosure. Going from a profit to from a nonprofit to a profit, now they don't have to show their books to anybody. Mm-hmm. So the reason they are having a cow, it's straight white supremacy. There is no way they want a black man forcing them to acknowledge the oppression that black people entered this country with and have lived with continually. There is not equal rights for black people in this country. Unlike everybody wants to pretend, there is not. I'm a white person. I have never said anything to my white nephews about being careful around the police officers and do your best and blah, blah, blah. These conversations, it is so outrageous that they pick on him, but it's the secrecy. Again, it's getting back to the fundamental core of the secrecy and the military coup that secretly was conducted in this country. By the end of World War II, our president told us what had happened. There was a military coup. Mm-hmm. And mission accomplished, tidied the bow and said, bing, guess what, folks? It's done. They can't undo it. None of these people in Congress have the nerve or the wherewithal or the willingness to lay down their lives for our country. Because, Paul Wellstone did lay down his life for our country. Paul Wellstone was one of the few elected representatives who wanted to know the truth about 9/11. He went to Florida to talk to people that the 9/11 Commission refused to talk to, who were intimately involved in the process. They had moved there. And on his way back, he and his family, their plane, it had an accident. Mm-hmm. We watched, I don't know if many people remember this, but remember, what was that poisoning? Patrick Leahy and Tom Daschle, they got that chemical poison, that white powder stuff. I forget what it's called. But then they quit immediately. Yeah, Daschle quit the Senate immediately. Quit the Senate. Just like Chaffetz quitting the Congress immediately so he doesn't have to investigate Trump, so did Daschle quit because he did not want to have to look at what was going on. He didn't want to have to be part of it. He was scared. That was a message to him and Leahy. Senator Leahy, after that, took a much more mellow vote, helped in the fascists roll in everything they wanted because it scared him. Those were subtle threats. They found out later that chemical came from a government lab. When I say we had perpetrators inside our government with high level authority, we did. Mm-hmm. And we do.
We still do. Absolutely. The word ethics, and I mean, that should have been a huge red flag to anyone that has been following national politics, is when Trump wanted to disband, or he wanted to allow people a pass from ethics. He doesn't think that they should be required to fulfill their ethical obligations. Well, if that's the first thing that the guy's worried about, that should be a big red flag for everybody, because it means that they're going to do unethical things. You don't ask for something like that if you don't have ill intent behind it. And so I think a lot of people are really frustrated with the trajectory of the country. And, there's just a complete lack of leadership. Our senators and representatives here, they have not had a town hall since the election. They don't have meetings. They don't meet with their districts. They don't. In fact, Ann Wagner, one of the area representatives, had the nerve to come out on social media the other day and say she was so happy and excited to be, speaking at this town hall. It wasn't a town hall. It was a business that she was giving a speech at. It wasn't the public. It was this business's employees.
Did you make that correction on her page?
I don't know that I did, because she's actually not my representative. My representative is Blaine Lukemeyer, because because of that Missouri River, it's just, it's just a different representative on this side. So
I speak out. Like, I talk about Chaffetz. He's not my representative, but I thought it was outrageous the way Chaffetz resigned instead of having to investigate Trump. And now he's a speaker on Fox News. He can't go into government, but he can go into media and make a boatload of money. So this is I think this is why we need to have these conversations, just to people don't want to discuss these things publicly. They don't want to say it. You sound like, it's not a conspiracy to look at the facts of 9/11 and know that this was perpetrated by people of high authority inside of our government. Airplanes were allowed to fly around for over 2 hours without anybody tracking them. They were told to stand down on purpose.
Well, and besides that, the number of coincidences that had to take place for all of those things to happen, and now for Trump to be limiting access from 7 different Muslim countries, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, who we know that was where the terrorists came from, but that's the one country that he didn't restrict. This is somebody screaming with a bullhorn. There's a problem here. There's a problem here. And yet nobody knows what to do. It's kind of bigger than any one person. Well, and I think that's a lot of the frustration for a lot of people, is they're going to work every day. They're taking care of their families. They're paying their taxes. They're trying to be good citizens. And yet we're being completely ravaged by the government, who completely ignores us and doesn't take our concerns seriously. This is just, I'm not sure what the answer is. I've never been so disillusioned with my country. I've always felt patriotic and that the Pledge of Allegiance meant something to me. And now I feel like it is indoctrination of children to say, even though you don't understand allegiance or, pledges, we're going to make you say this anyway, so that you have it drilled into your brain at an early age so that you won't ever dispute it. And that sort of has worked all of this time. And it's only now that there are other factions, like I know that one faction is called the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and they take active steps to remove indoctrination purposes from public entities such as public schools. So I think that they really have the right idea.
Yeah, well, the Trump administration is going in the opposite direction of that with Betsy DeVos. These people really are the American Taliban. I mean, ironically, when Trump got in, it looked to me like a CIA Pinochet 2.0 plan. They didn't have a fake military coup because the military coup had already happened. What they needed was a fake election to just have the military coup be completed. So they put in this puppet guy who actually believed that he got him, and still does believe he got himself elected. And I think that's why people like you and me are stunned that there were people who still believe in him, because people do believe that he's being sabotaged by, quote, the deep state. I think he was played by the deep state to get into this position to become the wrecking ball cabinet. He is going, I mean, they have made a point of underfunding the State Department. We don't need those jobs. Where, really the State Department is where we do need the jobs, because in order to keep peace, you need to talk to your enemies. You need to talk to people who don't like you. You need to get past the issues. It's really important. I mean, you can't just not have a State Department with the EPA, underfunding the EPA and getting rid of all these offices and eliminating, a lot of restrictions on chemical pollution. One of their first acts was to allow a chemical that our government, the EPA, did over 4,000 studies because this manufacturer wanted this drug on the market because it's highly profitable. So they kept pressuring them. The EPA did 4,000 studies. In every study, it showed that it was a bad chemical and it wasn't good for human consumption. And no, we shouldn't have it. The Trump administration, that was one of their first decrees, is the EPA rolled that back and allowed that chemical to now be produced in mass production. So this whole idea of protecting our country, it's all just rhetoric. I mean, we thought it was bad before. It really is. I mean, this is why there's a sense of urgency, I think, and a real sense of anger, because you're right. Even our so-called liberal senators are doing nothing, basically. They're whining and complaining, but like there's Nancy Pelosi and Chucky Schumer, like talking to Trump, like their faces, they look like the Cheshire Cat. They had really finally gotten over, and it was so disrespectful to our country, the deal that they struck. They if they really wanted to do something, they could have done something for our country and towed the line, but they didn't. I mean, I don't know. That whole thing of, well, we extended the debt by 3 months. So at Christmas time, it's going to force the Republicans to work. That's,
That is, I'm so disappointed with the current Congress. I don't even know what to say, because they do so little. They literally work less than anybody else's job that I know of. More days off. They really are just in it for themselves. And by that, I mean they're in it to collaborate with businesses and then get a chunk of their money so that they can deregulate the business. Every time someone says, these chokehold environmental laws, what are you talking about? The environmental laws were put there to protect people, not to chokehold any business. It's because they were trying to limit the businesses from killing people. And so to even imply that that the EPA exists so that it makes businesses, more difficult, that makes absolutely no sense at all. And it really is the businesses that are calling the shots. The people here in St. Louis are the perfect examples of that. The people that are financially responsible for some of the nuclear waste, they have a lobby group that lobbies to keep the waste where it is. And frankly, I don't think they should be allowed to do that, but yes, they are. There's nothing illegal about it. And so these people have been able to use resources and basically call people at random using robocalls to call people all over the state of Missouri and tell them that, they're shipping radioactive waste, and isn't that a bad idea? And so they get people to agree with that. They don't ever explain to them that there already is radioactive waste that's being shipped through Missouri each and every day They don't tell them that this has already been happening for years and decades, but they do want to have them in a kind of a gotcha moment and say, well, yeah, we don't want nuclear waste. What if something happens? Well, it's never happened. So, instead they're tricking people through their language. And it's really...
You know what? It's the same thing. The lobbyists in the Senate and the Congress. Who do you think wrote the nuclear? It's a 75-page Nuclear Waste Policy Amendment Act of 2017. You and I have talked about this the last time. And we still urge everyone to contact your elected representatives. Go and see if they are co-signers. And if they are, Lacey Clay is one of them. I was shocked of the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendment Act. And it basically takes away our water rights at the federal level, our local, state, and federal air and land rights. It takes away the necessity for environmental impact reports and for transferring nuclear waste. It takes away the necessity of, what was the other one that it took away? Let me go to the page. But Lacey Clay signed on to that. He's the representative for the Westlake landfill area. Go ahead.
Right. I believe he's also in the area of the city, which is where Mallinckrodt is located and where a lot of the other food ramp is being cleaned up. I might be mistaken on that because he's not my district representative, but at any rate, for him to even sign off on something like that, doesn't that just sound like the most unethical thing that a person who is supposed to, who has taken an oath to protect people within their district, and then they go ahead and sign something like that? That makes no sense. It just, I don't believe there's any such thing as an honest politician. And I would like to think that there is, but in my experience and the ones that I've met, and even, even at a city level or even at, the most basic municipal level, they're all looking at what's in it for them. And it's so disheartening. I would
still encourage you guys, because even though you're not in his district, still call him and get people that that are in his district to call him and say, take your name off of this. I faxed to his office 6 pages from Donna Gilmore's website, her little thing on the front page. It says, reasons to oppose H.R. 3053, Nuclear Waste Policy Amendment Act of 2017, and recommendations. And she laid out a very professional looking thing and a letter with a simple summary, a check sheet. I mean, it's awesome. I faxed this to his office, so they can't say they don't know what the opposition is. This is really ridiculous.
It really is. I'm going to check that out once we.
Well, let me read to you. This is what it says. This is it in a nutshell. It eliminates nuclear waste. It eliminates nuclear waste storage and transport safety laws. It preempts federal, state, local water and air rights and other rights. It eliminates congressional and public democratic rights of oversight, input, and transparency. It spends limited and inadequate nuclear waste funds without addressing current short-term and critical U.S. nuclear waste dry storage and transport problems. Each nuclear fuel waste storage container, one thin wall canister, vented overpack, and labor costs now about $4 million. It eliminates the requirement for a permanent repository before approving consolidated interim storage sites, yet provides inadequate funding for both. It gives authority to the DOE to negotiate contracts with private companies without oversight and without any requirements to evaluate the site, transport routes, or transport infrastructure prior to issuing contracts for consolidated interim storage sites. This bill refers to these sites as monitored retrieval storage facilities. That's called MRS facilities, but eliminates the requirements for monitored retrievable fuel storage. I faxed this thing to his office, because this puts it in a succinct thing, because the only thing our Congress is getting is that this is a money saver for our country. So it'll save them like $6 billion. They're like, yeah, well, we'll shed that from that goes off of the budget. This is all about the budget line items.
Absolutely. I don't understand who would agree to no oversight. That makes no sense.
What they're trying, that means it's going to be privatized. That's what oversight means. We trust you to take care of it. Since you're doing it now anyways, no need to tell us. Since we rubber stamp whatever you do anyways, I guess that's their thinking.
That is insane.
Yes.
I believe you. I'm certain that what you're reading is absolutely factual. I just don't understand why anyone would agree that for something so important and something that has the potential to hurt and kill people, that they're just going to say, yeah, no, we don't need to conduct oversight. What? That is the only thing you should be. I think that a lot of people have just been tricked, and they've been played and gaslit and told that things aren't the way that they really are. And because people would rather believe good news, they go with that. They have one person over here saying, well, everything isn't that bad. And then another person saying, well, actually, it has the potential to be really bad, deadly, in fact. Well, that's not good news. So they'll stick with the happy news.
Well, I guess the other representative from Missouri is Billy Long, Lacey Clay, and Billy Long. I don't know who Billy Long is. Do you?
I'm not sure who. Yeah, I've got to say I'm more in contact with the representatives that are right here in my region, and also with the county council members, which for anyone who might be new and listening to this, I know we've been kind of saying, it's difficult and a long road, and it might not really pay off in the long run, but that shouldn't dissuade anyone from going from their most, from their neighborhood association on up. And actually the county council, I think that is something that a lot of people, maybe they're afraid of public speaking, or they're just not used to it, or maybe embarrassed or something, that they might say something silly. Well, we all say silly things. So, we should just get over that part of it and go speak to the county council, because these are the people that are paid to listen to you. This is where you have a forum and an opportunity to say, I have concerns about this. I believe that a resolution should be made so that these harmful substances don't come into contact with people, and start putting the pressure on the local folks. And if we put pressure on our local electeds, then that will hopefully have a ripple effect, because right now it's too easy for the senators to just completely ignore us. I've left, I don't know how many messages on their machines with their staff. I've asked for calls back. Never once has anybody ever called me back. Never in years that I've been doing this. But yet in the local government, I actually have been able to get some calls back, and I have been able to get some fruitful dialogue with the council members and people, in lesser roles. And so I think the more pressure that more people put on these local people, the more of a ripple effect that will have to the higher up state and federal legislature. So we've got to do something. We can't just sit on our hands and, say what to do. We have to take action steps. That's what matters. That's what works. A lot of people do things from the comfort of their own keyboard, the, keyboard warriors or whatever, and that is needed also. But even more important is for people, live bodies to go and show up at these meetings and be there and say, these are unanswerable questions. This is this is something dangerous, and we need to do something about it. Even if, the answer isn't, let's at least say that we don't know what the answer is, but we know that we need to get an answer, and we need to continually work until we have one. So
Well,
I
I
would
think a
encourage
lot of
people.
times too, people need to investigate the causes of things in their lives. Like don't just accept it that everyone in your life. Look around. You can go to the EPA. Honestly, at least this is how easy it was for me to discover why I got sick in Redondo Beach. I went to the EPA's website and I typed in Redondo Beach toxic, and up
Mhm.
popped a letter that in 1989 that or 98 that was issued by the EPA explaining their 15-year study off of uh, San Pedro, which was right around on the it was on this little peninsula on the far side of the peninsula from Redondo Beach and back of a very high income little enclave on the cliff of a mountain. So they were dumping these chemicals and it was coming around the cliff of the mountain up to Redondo Beach and Manhattan Beach. And I was getting sick. But that I
Mhm.
found that on the EPA website. Like it made it, that's why I moved from LA because I'm like, every time I went into the water, I got really sick. If I touched the water in Redondo Beach, my feet itched super bad. I could only go to the
Wow.
beach the last 2 years there with my shoes and socks on all year
Mhm.
long. So then I didn't, and when I talked to the city, they said it was the sanitation because they had the sanitation place up the road, and that just happens sometimes. So I thought, okay, it's not that big a deal. So, but this was my point here. If there's something going on in your community, do a little bit of research, and that will help you get active because people go, well, I don't know what to pick. There are things, and that's the reason that you're listening to this station and to this show because your heart wants to get active.
Absolutely. And thank you again for having this show for all of the people that are interested and they want to be involved in their communities. I can't think of anything that would be more important than the next generation, the children, the air that they're breathing, the water that they're drinking. We need to protect these children, and we shouldn't wait for them to grow up to figure it out. We should do it for them because they weren't the ones that put that there. Neither were we. But, the buck has to stop somewhere. And if my generation is the last generation that has to deal with this, well, I hope that the universe sees fit for the stars to align in that direction because I don't think anyone deserves this. I don't think people should be bargaining chips on a legislative table. This is,
Right.
it's
We are definitely
it's
not
not.
assets on a balance sheet. That's what I say in my intro, which, by the way, we've decided I'm keeping my intro. The days may change, but it's my signature intro. We've decided I'm just going to keep it. But as a balance, we are not assets on a balance sheet. And that's the reality. We are human beings, and this is life on our planet. And this is some serious stuff. We have the capability to change the culture so that we can start discovering the solutions to 150, 200 years of pure chemical and toxic waste. We have the ability to create a world full of peace where war is not our, major product.
Exactly. Now we just have to create the political will, and we just do that one person at a time. So I hope even one new person listens to you today, Lonnie, and takes action and calls their representative today because it might not do any good, but it won't do any harm, and it might do some good. So I'm willing to go from there in the hopes that maybe this time it will change your mind. Maybe this time they'll listen.
Or just
So
steer the ship just enough, a little bit straight so that we're just not going to head right into the wall and collapse everything. Well, look, we have 30 seconds left, and I want to thank you, Wendy. You've been listening to Wendy Lumetta from St. Louis. She's a friend of our show, and as you can hear, quite a ardent activist and a true citizen, to be honest, a wonderful human being, a good example of being an American citizen. So thanks, Wendy, for joining us.
thank you,
Put,
Lonnie, for your sweet
yeah.
words.
Well, put your courage feet on, you guys. Take some action. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.